Everyone loves a good sailboat story, and I found a way that we can make use of them to help other people go sailing and give us a platform to tell them. So I'm going to tell you guys a sailboat story I have as an example, and then I'm going to tell you how we can make use of your sailboat stories to help other people go sailing. Okay? Stick with me. Back in 2018, I was sailing down the US East Coast with a GoPro, making my way to warmer weather and bluer water. Everything was new to me, and I had less idea what I was doing than I do now, if you can imagine that. Lady K was a 14,000-pound IOR racer cruiser of 35 feet, so coastal work was fine, but getting caught out in the Atlantic in a gale was not a wise idea. She just isn't enough boat for it. Luckily, the east coast of the US has lots of safe havens to hide in. The first major hurricane to make land in 2018 was Florence, which produced massive flooding damage in South Carolina and North Carolina.
The U.S. eastern seaboard is now feeling the wrath of Hurricane Florence.
It caused 54 deaths and $24 billion in damage. Luckily, I was up near Annapolis when that hit, so I took the boat up a little bit further from the ocean, up the Sassafras River to hide. I rented a slip and spiderwebbed the boat into that slip and then hunkered down. Some of the people around me in that marina had their boats hauled out in preparation because no one knew what Florence was going to do.
So you see some of the momentum as it sweeps across both North and South Carolina. That was one of the streets, now of course overrun with water, and this a local marina. Whipping winds, relentless rain expected to hammer the coast starting now and right through the weekend.
How far inland up the Chesapeake that she might be able to make it. All we saw up there, up the Sassafras, was 40 to 50 knot winds and the water level raising a few feet for a few days. The water took out the power in the internet for 3 days, but all the boats survived. Headed down the Chesapeake after Florence was pretty wild. We were seeing sailboats up on land, beached fishing trawlers, boats overturned on the beach. The damage was immense. Docks were shredded. Houses had the roofs peeled off. The further down the Chesapeake, the worse the damage was. It was all pretty haunting. So imagine my hesitation when the weather people said another one was coming.
So the Hurricane Center just issued an advisory saying that Michael made landfall Mexico Beach just east of Panama City with winds of 155 miles an hour.
Michael was set to hit in a few days, and they were still debating which way Michael might go. Would it be up the east coast like Florence went, or was it going to slam right into Texas? Being on your sailboat and really having no defense, you need to make decisions early. You need as much lead time as you can on a hurricane or tropical storm as you can get. Having seen what I had and the damage from Florence, I wasn't messing around. I knew I needed to be as many hundreds of miles away from the hurricane's path as I possibly could. If it were to come up the east coast, this time I would be right in its way. And I knew the real threat to the sailboat was the immense surge of water that would come. Sometimes 10 or 20 feet of water would come all at once, as well as the ridiculous and relentless winds. This time, though, I'd be ready. Luckily, Michael took the western route and slammed into Texas on the Gulf Coast, but the land just slowed Michael down. It turned from a hurricane to a tropical storm, and it still rushed toward Lady K, just not a hurricane anymore. We should be okay for water surge then, but the winds, they were the real threat now. I knew a few things. It would be huge wind from the south when it hit, and it would last a few days. We had about 24 hours notice, and the choice to run back to Annapolis to rent a slip and spiderweb back in, or find somewhere to hide. I studied the charts looking for somewhere with protection from the south wind. We knew it would be enough wind to peel the roofs off houses again. The closest good anchor holding was on the Pattison River at the Solomon Islands, so my buddy boat and I headed there. The buddy boat decided on one tactic, anchoring somewhere with lots of room to drag. That was the best idea for them. So they anchored right here in Back Creek. so that if they did drag from the wind from the south, it would be further inland and into the shallows, and the boat would not end up in a crop field or in someone's backyard or on someone's roof. That logic was pretty sound. We could always pull the boat out of the shallows later, and they stood a good chance at anchoring there. Even if the wind from the south exceeded the anchor's ability to hold, they would just drag into shallows. I took a different approach this time. I took the dinghy out and I looked for protection from that wind. If I could get behind some dense trees and maximize my scope, I did have the biggest anchor out of the bunch of us. I had a Rocna 55-pound and hundreds of feet of rode. I found a nice little spot with the dinghy and I went back and got Lady K. Around the corner from Back Creek on Spring Cove, I set a stern hook as the wind the day before was from the north. I knew my best chance of riding out Michael was to maximize the use of my oversized ground tackle. All that was going through my head at that point were all the sailboats I had seen the week earlier after Florence, up in the fields or worse, sunk to the bottom. I loaded the Rocna into the dinghy and dragged it out some 200 feet away from the bow, tied a bleach bottle to it to mark it, and then I dropped it. All of my chain was out, and then a bunch of my 1-inch nylon was out as well. I was sitting in about 12 feet of water with 200 feet of rode out, and I backed down hard on the Rocna, leaving it in reverse for a few minutes at almost full throttle to make sure that it wasn't going to slip. Michael slammed into the Gulf Coast and dissipated down to a tropical storm coming up toward the Chesapeake. With the GoPro turned off now, the boats hunkered down. We waited. It's all we could do. The winds hit at around midnight, 30 knots from the south, 40 knots by morning, 50 knots, 60 knots by afternoon. Lady K pulled hard on her Rocna, lifting almost all of the rode from the Chesapeake mud, but the anchor held. Lady K started to surf back and forth, pulling on her anchor. The large trees that I had anchored behind cut down some of the wind, but her bow pointed into the wind as it was designed to do, and it twisted back and forth like a dog with a chew toy. On night 2, she surfed back and forth, and then the rains came. Over 60-knot winds right on the nose, and the rain like I've never seen rain before. Rain so thick and so loud that I couldn't even see the stern rail from the companionway hatch when I stuck my head out. And no sleep. Lady K heeled 10 degrees to port and then 10 degrees to starboard, surfing back and forth on her chain. All that went through my head was, what if a shackle breaks? What if the chain lets go somehow? I had already tied the rode not just to the anchor cleat, but also the windlass, and then I tied that whole arrangement back to the mast. It's a keel step mast, so if anything's going to hold the boat, it would be that mast. For the rest of the night and most of the next day, Lady K surfed back and forth, but she never let go. The Rocna held. A buddy boat had dragged, but managed to stop before ending up in a field. When the storm finally cleared, we all took a breath, obviously, and started to raise each other on the VHF radio. No one lost a boat or was hurt in any way. We had made it through Michael. Thinking back on what I learned, and the most important lesson I think is, for me, don't stay on the boat. For 2 days of near 70-knot winds and the rain so hard you can't see more than a few feet in front of you, you're now in a life or death situation, and the boat is the only thing protecting you. If you fall out of the boat or get in a dinghy, you don't survive. There's nothing you can really do. You're literally helpless in the little fiberglass box. And even if her anchor did let go, a shackle breaks, or anything goes wrong, there's not really anything you can do anyway. The diesel isn't strong enough to power against 70-knot winds. All you do is hang on for your life and hope that you land somewhere right side up if everything goes wrong. It's not worth the stress and being terrified for 48 hours. Next time, I'd likely anchor in the same place, do all the same things, but then give the boat some love and get in the dinghy and leave. I would head for a hotel and ride out the storm, not being in a life or death scenario. Come back to the boat afterwards because there was nothing I could have done for her had the worst happened anyway. That's one of my many sailing stories and what I learned from it. It was about 1,400 words with some pictures to go with it. If you have a sailing story with a good moral at the end, I have a way to tell it to a massive audience. In Practical Sailor magazine, I'm going to start publishing one sailing story a month, 1,000 to 2,000 words with 3 to 5 pictures to go with it. If you want it to be your sailing story, send it to comments@practical-sailor.com. Again, 1,000 to 2,000 words with 3 to 5 pictures. Don't worry too much about how well you write. I have a team to polish it up. Just make sure you follow the instructions and include a moral to the story. What did you learn? This is how we help people go sailing. We tell our stories. Also, if you want to do something really big and be a bit more daring and tell your story on video like I just did, I'm going to start publishing those too. Point a reasonably good camera at yourself or you and your first mate if they were there for the experience and tell your story. Make sure your audio's reasonably good. I can add B-roll and dress it up so that it looks good on YouTube. We can start a whole series on sailing stories, and I, for one, would love to watch something like that. Again, comments at practicalsailor.com is the email. It's not checked by me, though. I have someone who checks that email, so please don't send me your whole life story. Follow the instructions. Also, the mission here at Lady K Sailing has always been to get more people sailing more easily, and I certainly couldn't do it without the help of the patrons. These are people who give a couple of bucks an episode so we can do all this stuff. If you can, please consider helping out and becoming a patron. Every dollar goes toward the equipment needed to do this stuff and the editing and everything else. I really, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down. I love you guys.